Next we have Sarah Button. Sarah is the Executive Director of Centertown Citizens Ottawa Corporation, which I believe most of you, if not all of you, know, CCOC. Her background is in urban planning and affordable housing policy, and she is a member of the Canadian Institute of Planners and the Royal Town Planning Institute in the UK. Sarah thinks complex problems are best solved by folks with different perspectives working together to change the system, and she firmly believes that affordable housing should be the easiest thing to build everywhere and always. Welcome, Sarah.
Thanks, Kevin. Okay. So I'm here on this panel to talk about affordability and how affordable is affordable and why that's so hard to unpack. In short, it's complicated. It can save us all some time if I just said it's complicated and we moved on, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to get into it a little bit, so bear with me. Everyone has a story to tell about their experience with the housing system, whether inside it or outside it or encountering it in some way. But before we get going, I want to talk a little bit about how I got my start in the housing sector and how it came to inform my understanding of affordability and the often hidden problems with one-size-fits-all solutions. So how did I get started in housing? It all started with an internship in the Philippines, and I was working on a cooperative housing project. One of the things that's really stuck with me from that experience was the soundbite rationale that the organization I was working for there used in its educational and recruiting materials. And it was basically this: the Philippines had an extensive government-supported housing program, but it was only available to folks who worked in the formal economy, and that usually meant teachers or folks in healthcare and jobs like that. The sticky problem was that a huge number of Filipinos did not work in the formal employment sector. They worked informally or seasonally or in jobs that weren't recognized by this program. So they were therefore excluded from this housing program. So the program was touted as successful, but it left millions of people unable to access it. And the cooperative housing movement in the Philippines was pretty robust, or so the cooperative movement was fairly robust, but it was mainly focused on workers' co-ops in the financial sector. Cooperative housing existed, but there wasn't a lot of it. And the mission that the organization I was there to learn from was trying to encourage other co-ops to consider using their considerable capacity to get into the affordable housing game. And they were trying to basically bridge the gap between all of those people left behind by these inadequate government programs. So why does this matter here? Like, why are we going down this path? Essentially what I'm saying here is governments all over the world try to create big, well-intentioned programs that may even be successful by some measures, but that completely fail to deliver for the people who are the most vulnerable and the people who are in greatest need. And the same thing is often true here in Canada. This early experience led me back to the affordable housing sector here in Ottawa, full of enthusiasm for housing models where folks could be engaged with their housing decisions, and eventually into a career driven by a belief that affordable housing should be the easiest thing to build everywhere, always, which was in my bio. I say that a lot. And at the time I thought, if I could just locate where in the system this problem was with affordable housing, I would devote myself to solving it. So I may have been a particularly naive or optimistic 20-something, but I'd like to take the rest of my time now to talk a little bit about what I've learned over the past 15 or so years of grappling with these questions. Given that shelter is a fundamental right and that every single person, housed or unhoused, has experience of aspects of the housing system, why is it such an intractable issue? Why is affordability so hard to define and affordable housing so hard to create? Why has this been such a constant problem for so long, despite many smart people pouring their hearts into it? Spoilers, I do not have the answer to those questions, but I'm going to try and unpack some of them a little bit for you. So how affordable is affordable? Hiding at the heart of these seemingly simple questions is a conundrum that no one has quite solved or really answered yet, and that is, what do we mean when we say affordable or unaffordable? For some reason, we can't really agree on a clear and consistent definition for this most critical of measures. Now, that doesn't mean there are no definitions. CMHC and Statistics Canada have at least one clear definition that's been in use for a while, and that is this: a household is in core housing need if its housing falls below at least one of the adequacy, suitability, or affordability standards. And those standards are also defined individually. Adequate housing is reported by their residents as not requiring any major repairs. Suitable housing has enough bedrooms for the size and composition of resident households according to the National Occupancy Standard. Now, both of those are deeply flawed, and I'm not going to get into that today because I'm going to talk about affordability. So just park that for another talk, another time. But affordable housing has shelter costs that are equal to less than 30% of the total before tax household income. So that seems like something we can get our heads around. But what about here in Ottawa? There are at least 10 different affordability measures in use in the city of Ottawa, from different programs, different levels of government, different types of housing. The new official plan has 2 affordability definitions: market affordable and core affordable. And we're likely going to hear a lot more about these in the coming years because they're pretty new, but they are coming. So the first one, market affordable. Market affordable housing is based on the 60th income percentile. And so if we're using 2016 census data, which is unfortunately the most recent that we have available so far, this translates to housing for households earning about $103,000 per year, with rents of about $2,600 a month. And this is where affordable gets to be a bit of a fraught term. Do those numbers feel affordable to you? No, heads are shaking here in the room for those of you who are online. Is that number affordable for your kids or your grandkids or your colleagues? Yeah, more head shaking. So the other one, core housing, is based on the 30th income percentile. So you're probably thinking, okay, maybe we're getting somewhere. Sounds better. Again, based on the 2016 census, this is housing for households with an annual income of around $52,000, with rents around $1,300 a month. So that probably sounds a little closer to affordable. There's air quotes happening for those of you not in the room. But there's some important context we need to layer in with that. So if core affordable is meant to be this deeply affordable measure for the city of Ottawa for low-income folks in our community, it doesn't come close. So here's an example. Someone making minimum wage working full-time likely earns a little under $30,000 a year. An affordable rent, according to that 30% rule of thumb, for someone making $30,000 a year is $750 a month. And if you are a person who receives Ontario Works or the Ontario Disability Support Program, you probably receive just under $400 a month for housing. Good luck. So how did we get here? How did we end up in this world where affordable doesn't mean affordable and we have 17 different definitions of it? I'm going to do a little bit of a history lesson. Bear with me. This 30% level is actually a pretty well-known benchmark. It's been in use for a long time. It's certainly the number that drives those numbers I was describing to you a moment ago about affordability in the Ottawa context. But what's less well known is that this 30% number has its roots in a 19th century accounting rule of thumb that went like this: 1 week's pay for 1 month's rent. Now, if you do that math real quick, you'll very quickly realize that that's not 30%. And in fact, we used to know this in Canada, actually. In the 40s, we typically used something closer to 20%. By the 60s, that had crept up to 25. Now it's generally 30. And if you scratch under the surface of those City of Ottawa definitions that I talked about a moment ago, you'll find that it's risen to 40% in some specific circumstances, even here in Ottawa. So along with this creep and likely related to it, we have way less social, public, or nonprofit housing per capita than many of our peer nations. As long ago as 1944, the federal government had some recommendations put forward that related to housing affordability in Canada. This is called the Curtis Commission. And at that time, that they wanted all new housing construction in the country to be divided into thirds. 1/3 would be public or nonprofit to accommodate the lowest third of incomes. 1/3, the next third in the middle, would be regulated, essentially something close to what is today rent geared to income. And the remaining third would be home ownership for the highest income earning households. You may have noticed that those recommendations weren't put into place. And that's a huge loss for where we are right now. And frankly, one of the reasons that we're probably in the housing crisis that we're in today. Imagine if we'd leapt on board that 80 years ago, how different things would look. We don't actually have to imagine because other countries are much closer. Toon spoke about some examples from France and Paris a few minutes ago, and it's a good example. They have a target for 25% social housing in every municipality by 2030. They're finding municipalities that don't meet those targets, and those targets are higher in the big urban areas. In Austria and Scotland, 24% of housing is social housing, and in the Netherlands, that proportion is 29%. So does anyone have any guesses for what percentage of social housing we have in Canada? You can put it in the chat if there's folks in the chat, but call it out in the room. I see 5, 10, 5, 2. I know some of you know these stats cold, so it's about 4% right now. probably just under. It was probably closer to 10% in the 80s when the real drop off in social housing construction began. And this real erosion, as I said, like dates to the late 80s and early 90s with the rise of condo construction, the downloading of responsibility for affordable housing to the provinces and then the municipalities, and the introduction of market rent benchmarking that made life both easier for developers and more difficult for social housing providers. Currently, we hear a lot of talk about solving these problems. Typically, the government, and the federal government in particular, is shy about using the pointy elbows and clout that they have to really enforce targets around affordability. The result of leaving it to the market for the past 30 or more years is clear. House prices and rents have escalated way beyond the reach for too many people. So why does this matter here in our neighborhood? The DCA represents an amazing downtown community. This area has experienced waves of immigration and has welcomed new Canadians for decades. We're sitting here at Plant Pool at the intersection of Chinatown and Little Italy, which is amazing. And this fascinating history is all around us. It's visible, it's embedded in the buildings, in the character, in just the art and the people and the life on the streets around here. Here we have a dense but low rise, diverse but relatively consistent residential neighborhood, but change is coming, change has started. Our neighboring communities have seen incredible change in the past 2 decades, and we're starting to see it here too. Toon spoke at length about some of these trends, but redevelopment like we've seen in Centertown to the west and Centertown to the east, Hintonburg to the west, and it's starting to encroach, right? At the south end of Preston Street, we've got condo towers sprouting like tulips near the LRT down near Dow's Lake, and at LeBreton Flats, we've got development also circling and coming quickly. And the risk here, the big risk, is that very little of that new construction is truly deeply affordable. And I know there are likely folks in this room who could rattle off a complete list of the truly affordable housing projects that have been built in these neighborhoods since 2000, and probably going back even further. It's not that many. And again, this is something that Toon covered in depth. The City of Ottawa has densification targets, policy prioritizing new building within the urban area, but you kind of wouldn't know it from the huge development beyond the Greenbelt. Increasing density has really important benefits like lower per capita infrastructure costs, more walkable neighborhoods, higher transit use, climate resilience, but new infill housing is almost never affordable. The long semis that you see all over Hintonburg, those new infill projects, they're often selling for over $1 million per unit with rents of $3,000 a month and higher. It doesn't even come close to the city's affordability targets in the new official plan. So wrapping up, the National Housing Strategy and Ottawa's new official plan direction are a part of the solution, but until they start working with a definition that is relevant, a definition of affordability that is relevant to the neighborhoods, to the communities that they're driving construction in, we will continue to get nowhere. It's not so different from that problem I described off the top in the Philippines. We have big government programs that claim to be focused on housing affordability, but they don't serve the folks who are actually in deep need. Earlier in my career, I was trying to ascribe blame for this problem about affordable housing, tried to chase down the root causes through various jobs that I've held. But these frustrations have led me back to an amazing job in housing delivery at the local scale, where change is more tangible and impacts on communities and individuals much more apparent. Addressing Canada's shortfall in social and affordable housing is one of the key ways that we can address this housing crisis and get back to a place where we have more affordable housing for everyone. So what are the takeaways? If you're sitting in this room, you're already likely pretty engaged with these issues, and if you're listening online, likewise. But the main things I'm trying to highlight here are that government programs often leave gaps, and affordability is often poorly understood and misapplied. We have a major lack of social, public, nonprofit, cooperative, deeply affordable housing in whatever character that it takes across the country. And here in our neighborhood, we're facing major upward pressure on affordability and livability, which was very well articulated by Toon, and I'm sure will be very well articulated by Angela as well. So if you're wondering what to do about it, I want to leave you on a bit of a high note and a bit of a what can I do. Stay engaged with the Community Association. They're a great conduit to what's happening around affordability and housing in this area, sharing great resources all of the time. Challenge folks who might be resistant to new affordable housing projects. Public resistance to projects is something that can really sink them out of the gate and stop affordable projects from happening altogether. Even a couple of supportive letters, a couple of supportive messages can really turn the tides on projects getting the go-ahead and driving affordability forward in this area. And finally, vote for housing. We've got 2 elections coming up this year, one very, very soon, and there's a great campaign happening at the provincial level called Vote for Housing with the number 4 in the middle. And there's priorities there to help you engage thoughtfully with candidates from all parties around housing issues. You can use these same principles when engaging with candidates around municipal housing issues later in the fall. So vote for folks who are going to use their pointy elbows and their political prowess to deliver truly affordable housing in all of our neighborhoods. Thank you.